Ares versus Apollo. The tragic tale of Zeus's two sons. In the grand theater of Olympus, where gods of cosmic power govern the affairs of mortals, we often see figures of simple, absolute purpose. We see Zeus, the king, Poseidon, the earthshaker, Hades, the lord of the dead. We see them as masters of their domains, their names synonymous with the forces they command. But beneath the shimmering gold of this divine fable lies a deeper, more tragic truth. The gods of the Greeks were not simple archetypes. They were complex psychological portraits, beings born of conflict, defined by paradox, and often tormented by the very nature of their own power. Their greatest strengths were so often the source of their most profound suffering. And among the divine siblings, two sons of Zeus stand as towering pillars of this tragic irony, each a master of a great domain, yet each in his own way a slave. One is the god of war, the embodiment of violence, fury, and the bloody clash of arms. His name was a curse on the battlefield, his presence a promise of slaughter. But what if this god of conflict was never its master, but was instead its eternal puppet, a weapon wielded by forces far greater than himself? The other is his brother, the god of light, the embodiment of clarity, reason, music, and truth. His name was a blessing of healing, his prophecies a guide for kings and heroes. But what if this god of truth was blinded by his own brilliance, forever haunted by the shadows that his own light cast? Join us as the Eldritch Codex pulls back the veil on one of these two powerful, yet tragic sons of Zeus. Join us as we explain the hidden truth of the god whose domain was not his kingdom, but his cage. Part 1. Ares explained. The god of war who was a puppet of a greater conflict. In the grand, gilded theater of Olympus, where gods of cosmic power play their parts, there are figures of light and figures of shadow. There is Zeus, the king, whose thunderbolt is the very signature of authority. There is Athena, the wise, whose gaze sees the intricate threads of strategy and civilization. There is Apollo, the radiant, whose lyre brings harmony to the heavens. And then there is the god who stands alone, a figure cloaked not in mystery, but in blood-red infamy. A god whose name is not whispered in reverence, but spat out in curses on the battlefield. He is the lord of the bloody spear, the father of fear and terror, the divine embodiment of slaughter. He is Ares. For millennia, his story has been told as a simple one. He is the brutish god of war, the divine berserker, a blunt instrument of violence in a pantheon of sophisticated deities. He is the god of courage, yes, but also the god of mindless rage. He is the god of the warrior's spirit, but also the god of the screaming coward when pain finds him. He is disliked by his father, mocked by his siblings, and often defeated by mortals. He is, by all accounts, a failure, a divine disappointment. But what if this simplicity is a deception? What if the story of Ares is not about the master of conflict, but about its slave? What if the god of war was never truly in command, but was instead a pawn, a puppet, a living weapon wielded in conflicts far greater and more profound than any single battle? Join us as we unsheathe the bloody history of the most misunderstood of all Olympians. Join us as the Eldritch Codex explains how the god of war was not the author of conflict, but its tragic product. A puppet dancing on the strings of his parents' eternal strife, a pawn on the chessboard of a wiser sister, and a slave to a passion that could disarm him more completely than any enemy spear. This is the story of Ares, the god who was a puppet of a greater conflict. To comprehend the essence of a god, one must first look to their genesis. We must travel back to the moment of their creation, for in the soil of their birth, the seeds of their destiny are sown. For some gods of Olympus, this genesis was a moment of cosmic wonder. Athena, bursting forth from the very mind of her father Zeus, fully formed and clad in armor, was born of pure intellect. Dionysus, twice born from his father's thigh, was a child of tragedy and miraculous survival. But for Ares there was no such wonder. There was no miraculous birth, no celebration of a cherished heir. To understand the god of war, we must begin not on a blood-soaked battlefield, but in the most conflicted and poisoned space in the entire cosmos, the marriage bed of Zeus and Hera. This union, which was meant to be the unwavering bedrock of the Olympian order, was in reality a perpetual grinding war of the soul. It was a crucible of cosmic dysfunction, a grand theater of infidelity, pride, jealousy, and humiliation. And it was into this unending, low-burning civil war that Ares was born. He was not a child of love. He was a child of strife. He was the firstborn legitimate son of the king and queen of all creation. In any stable mortal monarchy, this status would have been absolute. He would have been the crown prince, the unquestioned heir, the living symbol of the dynasty's strength and continuity. His birth should have been met with joyous proclamations, his future secured by the combined might of both his parents. But Olympus was not a stable monarchy, and the house of Zeus was not a house of peace. Ares was a prince born into a kingdom already at war with itself. The myths surrounding his conception are telling, for they all reek of conflict. One powerful tradition, recorded by the Roman poet Ovid, tells us that Hera, consumed with the bitter and jealous rage after Zeus had birthed Athena all by himself, resolved to do the same. She would have a child without him, a testament to her own creative power, a living rebuke to her husband's self-sufficiency. She touched a magical flower, the Flos Oleneus, and conceived Ares alone. In this version, Ares is not a product of union, but of defiant separation. He is a statement in a divine argument, a weapon of spite forged in the fires of his mother's resentment. Another, perhaps older tradition implies he was simply the natural son of Zeus and Hera. But even here there is no romance. Their reconciliations were rare, often violent, and born more of pride and possession than affection. Ares was likely conceived not in a moment of tenderness, but in a moment of fraught temporary truce between two warring powers. He was the offspring of a ceasefire, destined to carry the spirit of the war into the world. From his very first breath, he was a divine mirror, and what he reflected was the ugliness his parents could not bear to see in themselves. In his infant cries, they heard the echoes of their own shouting matches. In his defiant toddler rages, they saw their own unyielding pride. He was the personification of their worst impulses, a living monument to their marital failure. And because of this he was despised. He was a constant reminder of a truth they wished to ignore, that their perfect Olympian order was built upon a foundation of chaos. And no one despised this reflection more than his own father. The relationship, or lack thereof, between Zeus and Ares is perhaps the most critical and damning piece of evidence in the case for Ares as a cosmic puppet. Zeus, the All-Father, was capable of great affection. He doted on his wise daughter Athena. He showed a grudging paternal pride in the triumphs of his brilliant son Apollo. He even went to extraordinary lengths to protect and elevate his illegitimate mortal children, most notably Heracles. But for his firstborn legitimate son, he held nothing but contempt. This is not conjecture. It is a contempt immortalized in the sacred verses of the Greek epic tradition. The scene is the Trojan War, the grandest stage for Ares's particular brand of mayhem. The god of war, having been wounded by the mortal hero Diomedes with the help of Athena, flees the battlefield. He does not retreat with dignity. He screams, a sound like 10,000 men in agony, and ascends to Olympus in a cloud of black rage, a trail of divine blood marking his shameful flight. He storms into the throne room, not to report on the battle, but to complain like a petulant child, pointing a shaking finger at his sister, Athena, and whining to his father about his wound. Zeus's response is not one of fatherly concern. It is a blast of pure, undiluted scorn, a verbal evisceration that lays bare the entire dysfunctional heart of their relationship. Homer records the thunderous words of the king of the gods. "Do not sit beside me and whine, you two-faced liar." Zeus begins, his voice crackling with irritation. There is no comfort here, only accusation. He does not see a wounded son but a dissembler, a coward. He continues, his anger rising. To me you are the most hateful of all the gods who hold Olympus. Forever quarreling is dear to your heart? Wars and battles. Let us dissect the profound weight of this statement. The king of all gods, the arbiter of the cosmos, looks upon his own son, the god of war, and declares him to be the most hateful of all immortals. He doesn't say Ares is misguided or rash or difficult. He says he is the most hated. And he frames Ares' very divine function, his dominion over war and battles, not as a sacred duty, but as a disgusting personality flaw, a love for mere quarreling. It is the ultimate delegitimization. But Zeus is not finished. He then delivers the most telling blow, the line that reveals the true nature of the conflict. You have the unbearable, unyielding spirit of your mother, Hera, he snarls. I can barely control her with my words. And there it is, the truth laid bare. When Zeus looks at Ares, he does not see a son. He sees his wife. He sees Hera's stubbornness, her defiance, her unyielding spirit which he despises. Ares is not his own entity. He is merely a smaller male version of the goddess Zeus is eternally at war with. He is a pawn in their celestial psychodrama. A puppet whose strings are pulled by a maternal resentment that Zeus cannot stand. Ares' very being is filtered through the lens of his father's failed marriage. Zeus concludes his tirade with a final chilling threat that cements Ares' precarious position. Were you born of any other god and were so destructive, the king thunders, you would have long since been thrown lower than the Titans. The meaning is unmistakable. The only thing protecting the god of war from being cast into Tartarus, the pit of eternal darkness and torment, is the very blood tie that his father so clearly detests. He is not valued. He is not respected. He is, by the slimmest of margins, tolerated. His existence is an inconvenience, his position on Olympus a matter not of honor, but of begrudging obligation. This was the environment in which Ares was forged. Unloved by his father, seen only as an extension of his mother, his very nature condemned as a character flaw. Is it any wonder, then, what he became? He was denied the path of wisdom, which was claimed by the favored Athena. He was denied the path of craftsmanship, which belonged to his brother Hephaestus. The only path left open to him was the one his parents had laid out for him, the path of strife. He embraced it. He became the god of what he was born from. His divine function, therefore, was not war in its totality. The Greeks were too sophisticated for that. The noble aspects of war strategy, justice, the defense of the city, these were given to his revered half-sister, Athena. She represented Métis, the cunning intelligence. The war fought for a clear and justifiable purpose. Ares was given the messy, horrifying, and chaotic remainder. He was given the domain of Polmaswar in its rawest, most brutal form. He is the god of the physical act of killing. He is the divine embodiment of bloodlust, the intoxicating, terrifying frenzy that overtakes a soldier when the battle lines crash together. He does not care who wins or loses. He does not fight for a cause. He fights for the love of the fight itself. He revels in the clang of bronze on bronze, the screams of the dying, the smell of dust and sweat and gore. He is the god of the warrior's spirit at its most primal, a force of nature that sweeps across the battlefield, leaving a trail of broken bodies in its wake. He is not a general planning a campaign. He is a divine addiction, the addiction to violence that civilization tries so hard to suppress, an addiction that he was born to personify and to serve. To underscore this, look to his divine retinue, the court that accompanied him into battle. It was not a court of noble virtues. He rode to war with his own terrifying offspring, children he fathered with Aphrodite, the goddess of love. These were not children of light. His sons were Deimos, the literal personification of pure, unreasoning terror, and Phobos, the embodiment of mind-breaking fear. Imagine that entourage, the god of slaughter flanked by terror and fear. Often striding before him was his sister and companion in spirit Eris, the malevolent goddess of discord, who took pure delight in sparking the arguments that would fester into the wars Ares so loved. At his side was Io, a lesser goddess of war whose specific joy was in the sacking and utter destruction of cities. This was his circle: terror, fear, discord, and destruction. It was not a divine council. It was a pack of feral concepts, the unleashed dogs of war. This, then, was the entity forged in the crucible of his parents' failed marriage. A being whose purpose was condemned by his father, whose nature was a reflection of his mother's rage, and whose entire existence was dedicated to the perpetuation of the very chaos from which he was born. He was never given the chance to be a god of noble conflict or righteous victory. He was cast in the role of the unwanted son, a blunt instrument of violence in a family of sophisticated gods. He was the first and most enduring puppet of the greatest conflict on Olympus, the eternal, unwinnable war between his own mother and father. His tragedy is that he never sought to master war. He simply became its most perfect and most pathetic expression. The first and most defining conflict for Ares was the one he was born into: the unwinnable war within his own home, a war that cast him as the unwanted son. But a god's story is written across multiple fronts. To truly map the boundaries of his power and comprehend the nature of his servitude, we must turn our gaze from the dysfunctional Olympian throne room to the battlefield of ideas, a battlefield where Ares would face his greatest and most persistent rival. This was not a war fought against a titan or a monster. It was a cold war of ideology, a perpetual conflict of the soul, waged against his own half-sister, Pallas Athena. If Ares was the product of his parents' chaotic rage, Athena was the product of their schism. Born not from Hera's womb but from the skull of Zeus, she was her father's daughter in every conceivable way: wise, strategic, and favored. They were both deities of war, but they stood on opposite ends of the very concept, representing a celestial dichotomy that lies at the heart of all human conflict. In their eternal opposition, we find the clearest proof that Ares, the god of war, was never its master, but merely its most brutish and predictable instrument. To understand their rivalry, we must first understand their domains. They were two sides of the same blood-stained coin, yet they were fundamental antitheses. Ares, with his blood-caked bronze spear, was the god of Polmos. This is war in its rawest form, the chaotic, unpredictable, and horrifying reality of the battlefield. Polmos is war for its own sake, the hot-blooded, adrenaline-fueled fury of the berserker whose only objective is slaughter. Ares is the scream in the throat, the strength in the arm, the intoxicating and terrifying loss of self in the red mist of combat. He is the body of war, powerful, visceral, and utterly without a mind of its own. Athena, by contrast, was the goddess of Métis. This is cunning intelligence, strategic wisdom. Her domain was war as a tool of statecraft, as a means to a specific, calculated, and intelligent end. She represents the war fought to defend a city, to uphold justice, to achieve a lasting peace. She is the cool-headed general on the hill, observing the entire sweep of the battle, anticipating her enemies' moves, and exploiting their weaknesses. She is the mind of war, calculating, purposeful, and always in command. This conflict between the mindless spear and the intelligent shield, the aegis, was not just a matter of philosophical debate. It played out in the very foundation of Greek civilization. Let us journey to the city that would become the cradle of Western thought, the city that would bear Athena's own name, Athens. The story of its founding is well known. The contest between Athena's gift of the olive tree and Poseidon's gift of the saltwater spring. But within the heart of this city of wisdom, a different story involving Ares unfolds, one that subtly but surely establishes the hierarchy between him and his sister. On a rocky hill within the city, the most ancient and revered court of law was established. This court would try the gravest of crimes, murder. And its name was the Areopagus, literally, Ares's rock. Why would a court of law, in a city dedicated to wisdom, be named for the god of slaughter? The origin story provides the answer, and it is a masterclass in Athena's quiet dominance. The myth begins with Ares's daughter Alcippe. While she was near a stream, she was violently assaulted by Helirotheus, a son of the sea god Poseidon. Ares, discovering this violation, did not appeal to a higher authority. He did not seek justice. He was justice in its most primal form. Consumed by a father's protective rage, he immediately hunted down Poseidon's son and with his own hands, beat him to death. It was a raw, violent act of personal retribution. Enraged by the murder of his own son, Poseidon did not retaliate in kind. He did what Ares had failed to do. He appealed to the system. He dragged Ares before the council of the 12 Olympian gods to stand trial for murder. The location chosen for this celestial trial was that very hill in Athens. There, before the assembled gods, the case was heard. Ares, the defendant, argued that his actions were not murder, but a justified killing to avenge the honor of his daughter. It was the defense of blood feud, the old law of an eye for an eye. After the arguments were made, the gods cast their votes. The result was a tie. Athena, presiding over the assembly, cast the deciding vote. She voted to acquit. On the surface, this appears to be a victory for Ares. His actions were vindicated. He was set free. But look deeper beyond the verdict to the process itself. The god of war, for an act of pure instinctual violence, was forced to submit to a system of due process. His rage, the very core of his being, was not allowed to be the final word. It had to be contained, debated, judged, and ultimately legitimized by a court of law. The Areopagus, the hill named in his honor, was therefore not a monument to his power. It was a monument to the subjugation of his power to a higher, more civilized principle. And whose spirit animated this entire affair? Whose city provided the stage? Whose rational vote settled the matter? Athena's. Ares was made a puppet in the establishment of the very legal system, designed to render his brand of violent chaos obsolete. He won his case, but he lost the philosophical war. His rock became her courthouse. If the Areopagus was a cold, legalistic demonstration of this dichotomy, the plains of Troy were its hot, bloody, and spectacular theater. The Iliad, Homer's epic of the Trojan War, is in many ways the ultimate indictment of Ares, the primary text that cements his status as a divine failure. He enters the war on the side of the Trojans, but his allegiance is not born of any deep loyalty to their cause or any strategic calculation. He is there because his lover, Aphrodite, favors the Trojans and, more importantly, because Troy is the greatest spectacle of bloodshed the world has to offer. He is not a committed general. He is a superfan who cannot resist leaping over the barricades to join the brawl. He fights, as he always does, with the terrifying and exhilarating fury. He is a whirlwind of bronze armor and gore, a force of nature sweeping across the battlefield, driving the Greek Achaeans back in terror. But a hurricane has no mind. A forest fire has no strategy. He is a blind force, and because he is blind, he is predictable. And this makes him vulnerable to the one who can see. His sister, Athena, had sided with the Achaeans. She watched his chaotic rampage not with fear, but with the cool contempt of a master strategist watching a novice make obvious emotional mistakes. She saw her opportunity in the form of a mortal hero, Diomedes, the king of Argos, who was in the midst of his own heroic rampage, or Aristia. Athena descended from Olympus and appeared at Diomedes' side. She found Ares on the field, exulting in the slaughter, stripping armor from the men he had just killed. "This maniac," she says to Diomedes. "This renegade, this two-faced evil." Her contempt is palpable. She then gives Diomedes a direct order. Fight the other gods if you must, but do not dare to fight Ares directly." But moments later, seeing Ares's unchecked fury, she reverses her own command. She sees a chance to teach her brother a lesson he will never forget. She approaches Diomedes again, cloaking both of them in a mist of invisibility. She pushes his charioteer aside and takes the reins herself, the goddess of wisdom acting as a mortal's co-pilot. "Do not be afraid of Ares," she now tells him. "Drive your chariot straight at him. I will be with you." She then takes the hero's long spear, and with her own divine hand, she guides it, adding her celestial weight and unerring aim to his mortal strength. She was not merely advising him. She was loading the gun and pointing it. Ares, his senses consumed by bloodlust, saw only the charging chariot of Diomedes. He did not perceive the guiding hand of the goddess. He lunged forward, thrusting his own spear over the horse's yoke, expecting an easy kill. Athena, with a flick of her wrist, turned his spear aside so it flew harmlessly into the air. In the same moment, she drove Diomedes' spear forward. The point, guided by divine will, struck the god of war in the flank, just below his ribs, where his bronze cuirass ended. It tore through his divine skin, his immortal flesh. And the great Ares, the embodiment of martial courage, the lord of the battlefield, did not meet the pain with a stoic grunt or a defiant roar. He reacted with a scream of pure, undiluted, infantile agony. Homer tells us that he bellowed with the sound of 9,000 or 10,000 mortal men crying out in the terror of battle. It was not the sound of a warrior. It was the sound of a slaughterhouse. His retreat was as shameful as his scream. He dropped his weapons and his divine form shot up into the sky toward Olympus, not as a pillar of golden light, but as a black and ominous storm cloud, a trail of divine blood or ichor, marking his pathetic flight path. He stormed into the throne room, not to rally the gods or to report on the war, but to whine to his father. He pointed to his wound, pointed an accusatory finger at his sister, and complained that Athena had broken the rules by helping a mortal attack him. The humiliation was absolute and multi-layered. First, the god of war had been wounded by a mere mortal. Second, he had been driven from the field of his own sacred domain in terror. Third, his pathetic reaction had exposed his courage as a shallow facade. And fourth, it was all a meticulously engineered plot by his sister. Athena had used a mortal man as a puppet to defeat and humiliate her divine brother. She had proven before gods and men that Ares's raw power was nothing against calculated strategy. He was a pawn in a lesson designed to demonstrate her own unquestionable superiority. One might think he would learn from this. He did not. Later in the epic, his rage renewed, he decides to confront Athena directly, without mortal proxies. He sees her on the battlefield and charges, his voice full of insults, calling her a dogfly for setting gods against each other. "Now," he roars, "I will make you pay for what you did." He hurled his mighty bronze spear directly at her. For any other being it would have been a death blow. Athena, unimpressed, simply deflected it with her shield. The aegis, that terrible symbol of divine authority fringed with serpents and bearing the head of the Gorgon Medusa. The spear glanced off harmlessly. Then she gave her response. It was an act of pure sublime contempt. She did not draw a divine sword. She did not summon lightning. She simply bent down and with one hand, picked up a large black jagged stone that was lying on the plain. It was a boundary marker, a stone that ancient men had used to mark the edge of a field. Homer notes that it was a stone no mortal could lift. She took this crude, lumpen object, and with all her might, she hurled it at her brother. It struck him squarely in the neck. The god of war collapsed as if his strings had been cut. He fell into the dust, his massive body, Homer tells us, covering 7 acres of land. His magnificent bronze armor clattered around him. He lay there dazed, defeated, and utterly broken, not by a noble weapon but by a rock. The symbolism is inescapable. Athena's raw, tactical intelligence, represented by a simple piece of the earth, had completely overwhelmed Ares's polished, yet mindless martial fury. The final insult came as he lay in the dust. His lover, Aphrodite, had to come to him, take him by the hand, and lead him away from the field like a beaten schoolboy being taken home by his mother. Time and time again, the narrative of the cosmos reinforces this hierarchy. Ares is the raging bull, full of power and fury, but ultimately predictable and blind. Athena is the matador, calm, intelligent, using her enemy's own momentum against him. He is the storm. She is the mountain that breaks it. His entire domain, the realm of war, was a kingdom in which he was never truly sovereign. It was a game board where he was merely a powerful piece, but one that could always be captured by the wiser, more favored, and infinitely more dangerous queen. The life of Ares was a war fought on many fronts. We have seen how the conflict of his birth defined him as the unwanted son, a puppet of his parents' eternal strife. We have witnessed how the celestial dichotomy with his sister, Athena, exposed him as a blunt instrument of rage, easily outmaneuvered by the calculating mind of strategy. But there was another war, another front, one fought not with spears and shields in the dust of a battlefield, but in the gilded, perfumed bedrooms of Olympus. And on this front, the god of war would suffer his most complete and humiliating defeat. If Athena revealed Ares to be a puppet of strategy, his long and infamous affair with the goddess Aphrodite proved him to be a puppet of an entirely different, and perhaps even more powerful force, desire. For the mighty Ares, the lord of the bloody spear, the embodiment of martial fury and masculine aggression, was utterly and completely enthralled by the goddess of love. His brutal strength was no match for her soft beauty. His earth-shaking rage was easily tamed and chained by her slightest whim. Their relationship was not a partnership of divine equals. It was the elemental subjugation of strife by love, a timeless cosmic demonstration that the most hardened warrior can be comprehensively disarmed, not by a sharper sword, but by a gentler touch. The affair itself was the greatest open secret and most delicious scandal on Olympus. Aphrodite, the divine incarnation of beauty, passion, and sensual love, had been given in marriage to the lame god of the forge, Hephaestus. This was a union of profound and cruel irony, decreed by Zeus or Hera, as either a means to control Aphrodite's disruptive power, or as a cosmic joke. The most beautiful, most desired of all goddesses was bound for eternity to the only physically imperfect Olympian. Hephaestus was brilliant, loyal, and preternaturally skilled, a master craftsman who forged the wonders of the heavens. But he was also soot-stained from his forge, misshapen in his legs, and an object of ridicule among the physically perfect gods. Ares was his perfect antithesis. He was the epitome of divine physical perfection, radiating a dangerous virile charisma. Where Hephaestus was the diligent worker, Ares was the arrogant aristocrat. Where Hephaestus was intellect and skill, Ares was instinct and power. The attraction between the warrior and the goddess of love was immediate, primal, and irresistible. It was the magnetic elemental pull of polar opposites destined to collide. The brutal and the beautiful, the hand that destroys and the force that creates, the scream of the battlefield and the whisper of the bedroom. And so began their affair. It was passionate, reckless, and deeply insulting to the cuckolded husband. They would meet in secret, often in Hephaestus's own house, in his own marriage bed, whenever the craftsman god was away, toiling long hours in his volcanic forge on Mount Etna or the island of Lemnos. Here we see the first sign of Ares's subjugation. The god of direct, open, violent confrontation was reduced to the status of a common sneaking adulterer. He who reveled in the din of battle was now forced to operate in whispers and shadows, all at the behest of his desire for Aphrodite. He became consumed by a paranoia that was entirely alien to his nature. He was so terrified of being discovered that he would station his young mortal attendant, a youth named Alectryon, outside the bedroom door. Alectryon's sole duty was to stand watch through the night and crow a warning as soon as he saw the first golden rays of Helios, the all-seeing sun, begin to crest the horizon. The god of war was so thoroughly chained by his desire that he now depended on a mortal boy to protect him from the light of day. But passion makes even gods careless, and secrecy is a heavy burden. One fateful morning, after a long night of passion, the young Alectryon, exhausted from his vigil, fell asleep at his post. He failed to see the dawn. Helios rose in his magnificent golden chariot, his gaze sweeping across the earth, seeing all things hidden and revealed. And his all-seeing eyes fell upon the bedroom of Hephaestus, where he saw the god of war and the goddess of love, asleep and entwined in the bed of the absent husband. Helios was the titan of order and truth. Such a profound betrayal of the sacred bonds of marriage could not be ignored. He immediately drove his chariot across the sky to the forge of Hephaestus, and told the craftsman god everything he had seen. Hephaestus was shattered. But his reaction was not the explosive, immediate rage of an Ares. He was a god of the mind, of planning and invention. His heart was overcome not with hot fury, but with the cold, deep and calculating bitterness. His was the methodical anger of a craftsman who sees a beautiful thing being broken. He did not storm off to challenge his rival to a duel. That was Ares's world. A world of brute force and physical confrontation where Hephaestus, with his lame legs, knew he could not possibly win. Instead, he resolved to defeat the god of war in his own way, on his own terms. He would use his greatest assets, his mind, his unparalleled skill, and a desire for a humiliation so complete, so artistically perfect, that it would be sung about by poets for all eternity. He returned to his fiery forge, but the metal he worked was not for a shield or a sword. His heart, burning with the shame of betrayal, guided his hands. There he began to work, his hammer ringing with a new bitter rhythm. He was forging a net. But this was no ordinary net of rope or even of common metal. With his divine skill, he spun threads of bronze that were as fine and as delicate as a spider's web, yet possessed a tensile strength that was absolute and unbreakable. It was an impossible marvel of engineering, a web so subtle it was virtually invisible to the eye, and magically enchanted to be inescapable by any force, mortal or divine. With his masterpiece complete, Hephaestus returned to his home on Olympus. He went to his marriage bed, the site of his betrayal, and with cunning care, he draped the invisible net over the bedposts and canopy, linking the magical triggers to the frame of the bed itself. The trap was set. He then announced to his wife, with a heavy heart that was part of the act, that he was weary and was taking a long trip to his beloved island of Lemnos, a place the gods knew he often went for solace and work. Aphrodite could barely conceal her delight. As soon as her husband's back was turned, she sent word to her lover. Ares, ever eager, arrived in a flash. He was the god of war, arrogant and confident, utterly oblivious to the fact that he was walking into an intellectual ambush from which his strength could not save him. He and Aphrodite, suspecting nothing, fell into the bed, their passion overwhelming all caution. And the trap was sprung. In an instant the magical invisible net fell. It enveloped them completely, clinging to their bodies like a second skin. They were pinned, bound, and utterly helpless. Their first instinct, Ares's especially, would have been to fight, to tear their way out. But the more they struggled, the tighter the fine, unbreakable threads pulled. The god of war, whose strength could shake mountains, was caught like a common songbird in a hunter's snare. His power was utterly, completely useless. But Hephaestus's plan was never just about capture. It was about public humiliation on a cosmic scale. He had not gone to Lemnos. He had waited. He now turned back, strode to the door of his own bedroom, and stood there, looking upon his two enemies, perfectly ensnared in their moment of transgression. He did not enter to rage or to fight. He simply stood there, and then he raised his voice and called out to all the other gods. Father Zeus, all you other blessed gods who live forever, come here, he bellowed, his voice a mix of pain and vengeful glee. Come and see something that is laughable, and yet intolerable. See how Aphrodite, daughter of Zeus, forever dishonors me because I am lame. She loves this destructive Ares, because he is handsome and sound of limb, while I was born misshapen. It is my parents' fault, not mine. But come and see them lying together in my own bed. Pains me to see it. But I do not think they will want to lie like this for long, no matter how much in love they are. They will soon have no desire to sleep. But my trap, my chains will hold them, until her father pays me back every last one of the bride gifts I gave him for this shameless girl. The gods of Olympus assembled. Zeus, Poseidon, Apollo, Hermes, they all came and crowded into the doorway of the bedroom. The goddesses, out of modesty, stayed away. The male Olympians looked upon the scene. They saw the mighty Ares, the terrifying god of war, the embodiment of martial pride, trapped naked with the beautiful Aphrodite, unable to move, unable to cover themselves, exposed to the gaze of all. The chamber, instead of erupting in righteous outrage at the adultery, filled with something far worse, a fate more terrifying to a god of pride than any physical wound. Divine uproarious laughter. The gods laughed until the halls of Olympus shook. They mocked his predicament. They made jokes at his expense. Homer records the witty exchange. Apollo, the god of light, turned to Hermes, the messenger god, and asked with a grin, Hermes, son of Zeus, would you be willing to be trapped in such a strong net, if it meant you could lie beside golden Aphrodite? Hermes, the quick-witted trickster, famously replied, I only wish it could be so, Apollo. Let there be 3 such nets, unbreakable, and let all you gods and all the goddesses too be looking on, if only I could sleep beside the golden goddess. At this the laughter roared even louder. Ares, the symbol of masculine honor, the being for whom public perception of strength was everything, could do nothing but lie there, pinned, exposed, ridiculous, and utterly impotent. His strength was a joke. His rage was useless. He had been made a puppet and a spectacle of his own shaming. His strings pulled by his all-consuming desire for Aphrodite, and by the superior, patient, and cunning intellect of the husband he had so arrogantly wronged. Hephaestus only agreed to release the pair after Poseidon, taking pity on them, soberly promised to guarantee that Ares would pay the traditional adulterer's fine. When the net was finally lifted, the lovers sprang apart. Ares, consumed by a shame he had never before known, fled to his savage homeland of Thrace, the place the Greeks associated with wild, untamed warriors. Aphrodite fled to her sacred sanctuary on the island of Cyprus. The affair, though it would eventually resume, was forever tainted by this moment of ultimate humiliation. It proved, before the entire pantheon, that the god of war could be comprehensively and catastrophically defeated without a single blow being struck. His own passions were a weapon that could be turned against him with devastating effect. He was not the master of his own strength. He was a slave to his desires, forever chained not by enemy iron, but by the unbreakable golden threads of love and the laughter of his peers. A god's story like that of a mortal hero is told not merely in the chronicle of their victories, but perhaps more revealingly, in the catalogue of their defeats. We have seen him as a puppet of his family's strife, a pawn in his sister's strategic games, and a slave to his own desires. Now we must examine him as a tool, a powerful and dangerous tool to be sure, but a tool nonetheless. A rebellious weapon that often acted on its own violent impulses, but one that was repeatedly and decisively contained, overwhelmed, and defeated by other, greater powers in the cosmos. His story is one of constant, jarring encounters with his own limitations, proving that while he may have been the god of war, he was far from being the god of ultimate power. One of the most bizarre and profoundly embarrassing of these episodes comes not from the celebrated epics of the Trojan War, but from a much earlier and more chaotic time, the age of the Gigantomachy, the great war between the Olympian gods and the monstrous giants, the earth-born children of Gaia. Amidst this cosmic struggle, two ambitious young giants, the Elodai named Attis and Ephialtes, decided to wage their own private war on Olympus. They were twin sons of Poseidon, arrogant, immensely powerful, and growing at a terrifying rate. They boasted that they would pile Mount Ossa on top of Mount Olympus, and then Mount Pelion on top of Ossa, creating a stairway to the heavens so they could storm the home of the gods, overthrow Zeus, and take Artemis and Hera for their wives. Their ambition was matched by their might. As part of their audacious campaign, they targeted the god of war himself. The details of the confrontation are lost to time, but the outcome is recorded with shocking clarity. Attis and Ephialtes succeeded. They did not just defeat Ares in a fair fight, they captured him. The divine engine of slaughter, the being whose entire purpose was martial supremacy, was taken prisoner by the two upstart giants. Their method of imprisonment was one of calculated and absolute humiliation. They did not chain him to a rock in the Caucasus, as Zeus had done to Prometheus. Such a fate had a certain tragic grandeur. No, for Ares they chose something far more ignominious. They took the god of war, squeezed him, and forced him into a pythos, a large bronze jar, the kind mortals use for storing wine, olive oil, or grain. Then they sealed the lid, plunging him into darkness and silence. Let us pause to fully absorb the symbolism of this. The being who personified the explosive, expansive, and loud reality of violent conflict was confined in a dark, cramped, silent bronze womb. He was, in essence, put back into a state of non-existence, his power completely and utterly neutralized. For 13 months, over a full year by mortal reckoning, the god of war was trapped. The battlefields of the world fell strangely silent, the spirit of martial fury gone from the world, contained in a common storage vessel. He did not break free with his own prodigious strength. He did not use his divine power to shatter the bronze walls. He did not inspire such terror in his captors that they released him. He simply languished. He would have wasted away in that darkness, his divine power slowly fading into nothingness, had it not been for the intervention of another god. The giant's stepmother, Arabia, learned of his plight and, taking pity on him, secretly informed Hermes. The wily messenger god, the patron of thieves and stealth, snuck into the giant's stronghold under the cover of darkness. He unsealed the jar and freed the enfeebled, traumatized, and utterly humiliated god of war. This story, though less famous than his defeats at Troy, is perhaps even more revealing. It utterly demystifies him. It shows that his power, while immense, was far from absolute. It could be overwhelmed by superior brute force, proving he was not the ultimate expression of might, but merely one powerful player on a field with much larger and more terrifying forces in play. He was a puppet who could be unceremoniously taken off the board, not even worthy of a grander prison. He was quite literally canned. This theme of being bested by a superior force is powerfully and repeatedly echoed in his encounters with the greatest of all mortal heroes, Heracles. The story of Heracles is the story of Zeus's greatest project. He was Zeus's favored son, a hero whose destiny and power were divinely engineered to surpass all others. Ares was the unwanted son. Their inevitable confrontations were therefore not just clashes between two powerful individuals. They were cosmic tests of their standing in the divine hierarchy, a hierarchy in which Ares consistently found himself on the losing side. Their most famous one-on-one confrontation concerned Ares's own son, a violent and bloodthirsty man named Cycnus. Cycnus was a true son of Ares, a cruel brigand who haunted the sacred roads near Delphi. He would ambush, rob, and kill pilgrims on their way to consult the great oracle of Apollo. He delighted in bloodshed and macabre displays, and even boasted that he would build a temple to his father, Ares, constructed entirely from the skulls and bones of his victims. He was a blight upon the sacred landscape. Eventually, Heracles, as part of his many adventures, was tasked with ending this reign of terror. The hero, champion of order and civilization, confronted the brutal agent of chaos. A fierce battle ensued between the son of Zeus and the son of Ares. Cycnus was a formidable warrior, but he was no match for the might of Heracles. As the hero was about to strike the final killing blow, Ares could stand it no longer. He descended from the heavens in a flash, his bronze armor blazing, his giant spear in hand, determined to protect his son. He was not going to allow another of his children to be killed by a favored son of Zeus. The stage was set for a direct and unambiguous confrontation. The god of war versus the greatest mortal warrior who had ever lived. It was a direct test of their power, their martial skill, and their place in the cosmic order. Athena herself descended to advise her favored brother, Heracles. "Do not be rash," she warned him. "Wait for your moment. You may strike him, wound him, but you cannot kill him or take his armor. That is not your fate." Ares, consumed with rage at the impending death of his son, did not wait. He charged at Heracles, his spear aimed at the hero's heart, a blow meant to end the fight instantly. But Heracles, guided by his own patron Athena, was more than his equal. With his shield, he deflected the god's furious attack. Then, before Ares could recover, Heracles saw his opening. With a powerful lunge, he thrust his own spear forward. Just as the mortal Diomedes had done at Troy, Heracles, the son of Zeus, drove his spear deep into the unprotected thigh of the god of war. The bronze point tore through divine flesh, and a fountain of immortal ichor sprayed forth. And once again the great god of war screamed. It was a roar of agony and shock. He had been wounded, defeated, by a mortal. His sons, terror and fear, swooped down in their chariot, scooped up their wounded father, and carried him away in a dark cloud of shame and pain, back to the refuge of Olympus. As soon as the god was gone from the field, Heracles turned and dispatched the now unprotected Cycnus with ease. The outcome of this battle is deeply significant. Ares, in a direct, one-on-one confrontation, with his own son's life on the line, was decisively defeated by Heracles. This wasn't a trick like Hephaestus's net. This wasn't a case of being outsmarted, like his battles with Athena. This was a straightforward martial contest and he lost. It serves to reinforce the rigid hierarchy of the cosmos. Ares was the son of Zeus, yes, but Heracles was Zeus's favored son. Heracles was a divine project, a hero whose destiny was foreordained to be one of ultimate triumph. Ares, the unwanted son, was merely a high-level obstacle in that divinely sanctioned narrative. He was a puppet in the grander story of Zeus's patronage of Heracles, a story in which Heracles was the star and Ares was the supporting antagonist, there to be overcome in order to further demonstrate the hero's unparalleled greatness. These stories, the imprisonment in the bronze jar and the defeat at the hands of Heracles, paint a consistent and undeniable picture. They show a god who is repeatedly and forcefully put in his place. He is a formidable force, a rebellious tool that often lashes out on its own, but one that is consistently reined in, contained, and mastered by other greater powers. His will is broken by the cunning of Hephaestus. His strategy is dismantled by the wisdom of Athena. His strength is overwhelmed by the might of giants, and his martial prowess is surpassed by the divinely favored hero Heracles. He is the god of conflict who keeps finding himself on the losing side of every conflict that truly matters. He is a force, but he is not a master. He is a weapon, but one that other, stronger hands can consistently blunt, break, or simply put back in its box when it becomes too troublesome. His story is a long, slow, and often humiliating lesson in the concept of limitations. And so we arrive at the end of our campaign, at the final unraveling of the myth of Ares. We have marched through the battlefields of his life, from the bitter domestic strife of his birth to the humiliating plains of Troy. We have catalogued his defeats, plumbed the depths of his passions, and measured the stark limits of his power. Now, with the evidence assembled and the history reviewed, the final image of the god of war comes into sharp, undeniable focus. It is not the image of a sovereign, a commander, a master of his domain. It is the image of a puppet, a divine marionette, his limbs jerking on the strings of forces far more powerful, far more profound, and far more fundamental than his own celebrated rage. Let us pull back these strings one by one and see to whom and to what they are attached. First, and most fundamentally, he was a puppet of his lineage. He was born into the heart of the Olympian civil war, the endless conflict between his father, Zeus, and his mother Hera. He was not a child of love, but a child of strife, a living personification of their dysfunction. When his father looked at him, he saw not a son, but a hated reflection of his wife's unyielding spirit. When his mother looked at him, she saw not a cherished heir, but a weapon in her eternal struggle for respect. He was the unwanted son who spent his immortal existence acting out, on a global scale, the very chaos that had created him. His love of war was not a choice. It was his inheritance, a curse passed down in his divine blood. Second, he was a puppet of strategy. He was forever pitted against his wiser, more favored half-sister, the formidable Pallas Athena. He was the god of war's body. She was its brilliant mind. On the plains of Troy, the greatest theater of war the ancient world had ever conceived, his mindless fury was consistently outmaneuvered, contained, and catastrophically humiliated by her cold, calculating intellect. She used a mortal's spear to wound him, a simple boundary stone to fell him. She proved for all time that brute force is a slave to cunning intelligence. He was the raging spear, but she was the steady, intelligent hand that could guide a rival spear to his flesh, or simply cast his own aside. He was a piece in a divine game of stratego, and she was the player who always saw 10 moves ahead. Third, he was a puppet of desire. His long, scandalous affair with Aphrodite was not a romance between equals. It was a comprehensive subjugation. The god of war, for whom martial honor and public reputation should have been paramount, was reduced to a sneaking adulterer, reliant on a mortal boy to serve as a lookout. He was captured not by enemy soldiers, but by the ingenious net of a cuckolded husband. He was defeated not by a superior weapon, but by the power of laughter. Before the entire pantheon, his strength was rendered impotent, his rage made ridiculous. This epic humiliation demonstrated a profound cosmic truth, that the primal urge to destroy can be utterly mastered by the primal urge to create. His own passions were a weapon that others could, and did, turn against him with devastating effect. And finally, as we have seen, he was a puppet of power itself. His story is a litany of encounters with his own limitations. He was captured and imprisoned in a bronze jar by the giants Otis and Ephialtes, a humiliation that required the stealth of Hermes to undo. He was wounded and defeated in direct, one-on-one combat by the mortal hero Heracles, a hero whose strength was underwritten by the favor of Ares' own father. These were not just defeats. They were categorical statements of his place in the cosmic hierarchy. He was a force but not an ultimate force. He was a weapon, but a weapon that could be broken, blunted, or simply put away by those with greater might, greater cunning, or greater divine favor. But perhaps the most compelling, the most definitive piece of evidence for Ares' true nature in the Greek imagination comes not from what the Greeks did with him, but from what their successors, the Romans, did. The rise of Rome marks one of the most significant transformations in the history of religion and myth. As the burgeoning Roman Republic began to conquer and absorb the Hellenistic world, they encountered the Greek pantheon. They did not discard these gods. They syncretized them, mapping their own deities onto the Greek archetypes. And their treatment of Ares is the most revealing transformation of all. The Romans took this hated, chaotic, unpredictable, and often defeated god of slaughter, and they remade him. They forged him anew into one of their most central, most revered, and most important state deities, Mars. Mars was not simply Ares with a new name. Mars was everything Ares was not. Where the Greeks saw Ares as a force of disruptive chaos, the Romans saw Mars as a pillar of sacred discipline. Where Ares represented the ugly, personal horror of the individual soldier's bloodlust, Mars represented war as a solemn, necessary instrument of the state, a sacred duty undertaken to protect and expand the gloria of Rome. Ares was the screaming berserker who fled the field when wounded. Mars was the divine legionary, standing firm in the line of battle. The Romans called him Mars Gradivus, the one who marches, the steady, relentless, and orderly god of the campaign. Ares was an adulterer who brought shame to the halls of Olympus. Mars was revered as the mythical father of the Roman people themselves, through his divine union with the Vestal Virgin Rhea Silvia, which produced the twin founders Romulus and Remus. He was not a homewrecker. He was the ultimate patriarch of the city. The Greeks built temples to Athena, the goddess of strategy. The Romans built magnificent temples to Mars Ultramars the Avenger. This was not the god of petty, personal vendetta, like Ares avenging his daughter. This was the god of formal state-sanctioned retribution, the divine force that justified Rome's wars against its enemies. The Campus Martius, the field of Mars in Rome, was not just a place for soldiers to train. It was a sacred space at the heart of their civic identity. This transformation is profoundly significant. It is a window into the souls of two great civilizations. The Greeks, a culture of philosophers, dramatists, artists, and fierce individualists, looked at the raw, primal energy of war and saw in it something terrifying, shameful, and ultimately irrational. They created Ares to be the divine container for all of these ugly truths. He was their scapegoat for the part of themselves they feared and did not respect, the capacity for mindless violence. They needed a god to be a failure so they could celebrate the triumph of reason over chaos. The romantic culture of soldiers, engineers, lawyers, and empire builders looked at that very same primal energy and saw something entirely different. They saw potential. They saw a terrifying force that, if properly disciplined, honored, ritualized, and integrated into the very fabric of the state, could be the engine of their destiny. They took the puppet, Ares, and through the sheer force of their cultural will, they restrung him. They made him a pillar of their world. The astonishing success of the Roman Empire was, in a way, a testament to their unique ability to domesticate and weaponize the very force that the Greeks had seen only as a disruptive problem. The Romans mastered their Mars, and in doing so they mastered the world. So, in the final unraveling, what is Ares? He is not the master of conflict, nor is he its ultimate cause. He is the experience of conflict. He is the raw, unfiltered, and painful truth of what happens when order breaks down, when diplomacy fails, and when the spear is raised. He is the divine embodiment of the adrenal gland, the scream that erupts from the throat, the savage joy of the charge, and the bitter agony of the wound. He is a necessary god in a world that is, and always has been, rife with strife. But he is not the mind that decides to go to war. He is not the king who gives the command, nor the strategist who draws the battle plan. He is not the cause of the conflict. He is its most immediate, most visceral, and most terrifying symptom. He is the god in the war machine, but never its driver. He is the rage that powers the fist, but not the brain that clenches it. His story is a tragedy, a tragic figure born of conflict, defined by it, and ultimately a servant to it. He serves his parents' dysfunction. He serves his sister's genius. He serves his lover's whims. He serves the agendas of greater powers. His chronicle is a timeless and profound warning, echoing down to us from the ancient world, that the greatest forces of destruction are often not masters of their own will. They are merely puppets dancing on the strings of the very chaos they seem to command, forever fighting in conflicts far greater, far more complex, and far more tragic than they can ever truly understand. Part 2. Apollo explained. The god of light who was haunted by his own prophecies. Upon the sun-drenched peaks of Mount Olympus, amidst the pantheon of gods who ruled the cosmos, there was one who seemed to be the very definition of perfection, a deity of such radiant beauty and multifaceted talent that he embodied the very ideal of divine magnificence. He is the god of music, whose lyre could tame wild beasts and bring harmony to the heavens. He is the god of healing, the father of medicine, who could cleanse the body of plague. He is the god of the sun itself, the golden archer whose arrows could be darts of pestilence or rays of light. He is Apollo. But among his many divine portfolios, one stands supreme, defining his essence and his influence over the mortal world. He is the god of prophecy. It was to his sacred shrine at Delphi that kings and heroes journeyed, seeking to pull back the veil of time and glimpse the inexorable shape of their fate. He was the voice of truth, the master of clarity, the god whose light was meant to banish the shadows of doubt and ignorance. But what happens when the god of light is forced to stare into his own darkness? What becomes of the god of clarity when his own life is a tapestry of tragic, inescapable knots? This is the central paradox, and the profound tragedy, of the son of Zeus and Leto. For the story of Apollo is not a simple chronicle of a radiant, all-powerful god. It is the story of a being haunted by his own greatest gift, a prophet who could foresee the fall of kingdoms, but not the deaths of those he loved, a healer who brought plague upon the children of his enemies, a divine artist whose demand for perfection led to acts of terrifying brutality. His light did not, in the end, illuminate a path to happiness for himself. It only served to cast his own personal tragedies into the starkest and most painful relief. Join us as we journey into the brilliant, yet heartbreaking world of the Golden God. Join us as the Eldritch Codex explains how the master of the oracle at Delphi was a slave to his own fate, and how the god of light was forever haunted by the shadows of his own prophecies. To comprehend the essence of a god, one must first look to their genesis. We must travel back to the moment of their creation, for in the soil of their birth, the seeds of their destiny are sown. For some gods of Olympus, this genesis was a moment of cosmic wonder. Athena, bursting forth from the very mind of her father Zeus, fully formed and clad in armor, was born of pure intellect. Dionysus, twice born from his father's thigh, was a child of tragedy and miraculous survival. But for Apollo, the god who would come to be known as Phoebus, the Shining One, there was no such wonder. There was no celestial nursery bathed in light, no joyous proclamations welcoming a radiant new prince. To understand the god of light, we must begin in darkness. His story commences not with a celebration, but with a curse, not with a welcome, but with a world-spanning exile. He was a child born on the run, his first breaths drawn on a fugitive island under the vast and terrifying shadow of a queen's relentless hatred. His very existence was an act of defiance against a cosmos that was actively trying to erase him before he could even be named. His story and his tragedy begins with his mother, the gentle Titaness Leto. In the complex political and romantic landscape of Olympus, Leto was a figure of quiet dignity. But her grace and beauty caught the ever-wandering eye of Zeus, the king of the gods. Their union, a brief affair in the grand scheme of Zeus's many transgressions, had a consequence of cosmic significance. Leto became pregnant with twins. But what should have been a divine blessing became a declaration of war. The news of the affair and the impending birth reached the ears of Zeus's wife, the queen of heaven Hera, and it ignited in her a fury of legendary proportions. For Hera, this was not just another dalliance. Leto was a Titaness, a being of the old order, and any child she bore by Zeus would be immensely powerful. They would be a living, breathing testament to her own public humiliation, a threat to the legitimacy of her own children and her own standing. And so Hera's prophetic madness, which we have chronicled before, descended upon the unfortunate Leto with its full terrifying force. The Queen of Heaven issued a decree, a curse of such magnitude that it bent the very laws of nature. She forbade any land that saw the light of the Sunavary continent, every island, every kingdom, every patch of solid earth from granting Leto sanctuary to give birth. The very ground, the domain of the Earth Mother Gaia, was commanded to recoil from the pregnant Titaness. Mountains would refuse her passage, rivers would block her path. Leto was made a pariah not of a single society, but of the entire terrestrial world. But Hera's vengeance was not limited to this passive cosmic banishment. To ensure her curse was actively and cruelly enforced, she unleashed a monstrous agent of her wrath. She summoned from the primordial darkness the Python, a colossal chthonic serpent. This was no mere beast. The Python was a child of Gaia, a remnant of the old earthy pre-Olympian world order, a being of immense power and ancient malice. Its lair was on the mist-shrouded slopes of Mount Parnassus, at the sacred site of Pytho, the place considered the omphalos, the very navel of the world. Hera gave this creature a single simple command: hunt Leto. Hunt her relentlessly across the globe, and ensure that she and the abominations in her womb find no rest and no place to be born. And so began Leto's ordeal, a harrowing pilgrimage of pain and terror. Imagine her plight. Heavy with divine children, her body aching, her spirit filled with the primal hunted fear. Every direction she turned, she was met with rejection. The world itself had become her prison. She wandered from land to land, a lonely figure fleeing from a curse she could not escape. And always behind her, she could feel the presence of the great serpent. She could hear its monstrous scales scraping over rock and sand, smell its ancient earthy malice on the wind. The Python was Hera's hatred made flesh, a relentless stalking promise that her ordeal would end only in a violent death. Days bled into weeks and weeks into months. Leto grew more and more desperate as the time of her delivery drew perilously near. The pain in her body was matched only by the despair in her heart. She begged the heavens, she begged the earth, but the curse of the Queen of Olympus was absolute. So great was Hera's power, so terrifying her rage, that no land dared to defy her. But the fates had woven a different destiny. There was a loophole in Hera's curse. A tiny barren rocky island named Delos drifted aimlessly upon the Aegean Sea. Because it was not anchored to the seabed, because it floated upon the waves, it was not technically land under the sun. It existed in a state of exception, a piece of cosmic flotsam outside the bounds of Hera's decree. The desperate people of Delos, perhaps reasoning that they were too insignificant to warrant Hera's full attention, and that a great destiny awaited them if they accepted, agreed to give Leto refuge. In some versions of the myth, it was Poseidon, the god of the sea, who took pity on her and with his mighty trident, anchored the floating island with 4 great pillars, creating a stable, if isolated, sanctuary. Here at last Leto's flight came to an end. But her suffering did not. Hera, seeing that the birth was now inevitable, played one final cruel card. She held back Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, her own daughter, forbidding her from attending to Leto. Without the presence of the goddess of childbirth, Leto's labor was an agony beyond mortal comprehension. For 9 days and 9 nights she writhed in pain, clinging to a sacred palm tree. The greatest goddesses of Olympus, Dione, Rhea, Themis, gathered to help her, but they were powerless to ease her suffering without Eileithyia. Finally, the goddesses bribed Hera's messenger, Iris, with a magnificent necklace, to secretly fetch the goddess of childbirth. With Eileithyia's arrival, the ordeal could finally end. First, Leto gave birth to Artemis, the future goddess of the hunt and the moon. In a feat of miraculous precocity, the newborn Artemis, her mind already wise, immediately turned to help her mother deliver her twin. And then, as the first rays of a new dawn broke over the Aegean, Apollo was born. The god of light made his entrance into a world that had tried to reject him. His birth secured only by a legal loophole, a divine bribe, and the strength of his mother and sister. The sacred swans of Olympus circled the island 7 times in his honor, and all of Delos was bathed in a sudden brilliant golden light. He was born, and the cosmos itself seemed to exhale in relief and wonder. But the shadows of his genesis still lingered. The agent of his mother's torment, the great serpent Python, still coiled in its lair on Mount Parnassus. This beast was more than just a monster. It was the guardian of the world's most sacred site of prophecy. It was the living symbol of the old, chthonic, intuitive, female-centric order that had ruled before the logical, male-centric Olympians had seized power. For Apollo to truly become himself, for him to claim the domains that fate had ordained for him, he could not simply coexist with this remnant of the past. He had to conquer it. Though he was only a few days old, his divine power was already nearly unmatched. Hephaestus, the craftsman god, had already forged for him his divine weapons, a silver bow, and a quiver of inescapable golden arrows. Armed with these, the infant god set out on his first quest. It was not a quest for glory, but a quest for vengeance and for destiny. He hunted the great serpent that had hunted his mother. He tracked it to its misty lair at Pytho, amidst the fissures of Mount Parnassus from which the prophetic vapors rose. There the confrontation took place. The new god of golden light against the ancient serpent of darkness. It was a titanic battle. The python was a terrifying foe, its monstrous coils capable of crushing mountains, its venom a deadly poison. But Apollo was relentless. He pursued the beast into the deepest chasms of the earth, and with his shining arrows, he pierced its scaled hide again and again. Finally, the great serpent, the child of Gaia, the voice of the earth's ancient prophecies, lay dead. Its massive body rotted in the sacred fissure, and the place was renamed Delphi, from the Greek word Pythian, meaning to rot. Apollo's first act as a god was an act of conquest. It was an act of matricidal vengeance, killing the creature that tormented his mother, but it was also a symbolic matricide, killing the agent of the Earth Mother, Gaia. He had slain the past, and upon its corpse he built his future. He did not invent prophecy. He seized it. He appropriated the power of the defeated serpent. He established his own temple on that very spot, claiming the prophetic vapors for himself. He installed his own priestess, the Pythia, who would be named for the slain beast. It would be she who would sit upon a tripod over the fissure, breathe the sacred fumes, and become the vessel for his divine voice, speaking his truths to the world. This, then, was the genesis of Apollo. It contains in microcosm every contradiction and every tragedy that would follow him throughout his long immortal life. He is the god of light, but he is born from a desperate flight into darkness and exile. He is the god of clarity and reason, but his foundational act is one of primal violent vengeance. He is the god of prophecy, but he gains this title through the hostile takeover of an older, rival power. He is the champion of the new Olympian order, but his entire identity is forged in a struggle against the very chthonic female aspect forces that his father so often dallied with. Apollo slew the python, but the serpent's legacy, the inescapable, often tragic, nature of fate would wrap itself around his own heart for eternity. He had conquered the darkness, but in doing so, he had bound himself to it forever. His entire life would be a struggle to impose his ideal of clean, rational, sunlit order on a messy, chaotic world, only to discover time and time again that the most profound and painful shadows were the ones cast by his own brilliant, blinding light. With the monstrous python slain and its ancient power absorbed, Apollo's conquest was complete. He was no longer the fugitive child of Delos, but a mighty Olympian god in his full glory. He was Phoebus Apollo, the Shining One, and from his new seat of power at Delphi, his influence would radiate across the entire mortal world. He was now the god of prophecy, the divine conduit of truth, the final arbiter of fate. To his sacred shrine at Delphi the world would come. Great kings would make pilgrimages, bearing priceless gifts, seeking to know if they should wage war or sign treaties. Heroes would journey to its hallowed halls to learn the shape of their epic quests. Humble farmers would ask if their crops would flourish. The Oracle of Delphi became the spiritual and psychological center of the Hellenic world. The cryptic, poetic verses spoken by his priestess, the Pythia, as she sat entranced upon her tripod, were considered the very words of Zeus, transmitted through his favorite son. Apollo held the future of mankind in his hands. He was the master of clarity, the bringer of light to the darkness of uncertainty. But here, in the heart of his greatest power, lies the seed of his most profound tragedy. For the curse of the prophet is this: knowing the truth and being able to benefit from it are two vastly different, and often cruelly separated, things. Apollo, the great giver of truth to the world, would discover that his divine gift was utterly and hopelessly useless in the one arena where he seemed to struggle the most: the chaotic, irrational, and deeply human realm of love and desire. Here, his prophetic clarity did not lead to connection. It led to bitterness and tragedy. His divine gifts, offered as tokens of affection, became instruments of torture. He, the god of foresight, would prove himself to be devastatingly blind to the workings of the heart. And in his failures we see the agonizing truth of his existence. He could give the gift of sight to others, but he would remain forever haunted by his own inability to see a path to his own happiness. Before we explore his personal failures, we must first understand the nature of his prophecies. The truth Apollo offered was rarely simple or comforting. It was often a riddle, a paradox, a statement that was technically true but practically misleading. This truth was a dangerous fire, one that could illuminate the path ahead or just as easily burn the seeker to ash. Consider the classic tale of Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king of Lydia. He stood at a crossroads, contemplating a war against the rising power of the Persian Empire. Before committing his armies, he did what any wise king would do. He sent messengers to Delphi with lavish gifts to ask the great oracle for guidance. The question was simple: should Croesus go to war with Persia? The Pythia, channeling Apollo, gave a typically cryptic response: if Croesus crosses the Halys River, he will destroy a great empire. Croesus, a man accustomed to success, heard only what he wanted to hear. He interpreted the prophecy as a divine guarantee of his own victory. The great empire to be destroyed, he assumed, was that of his enemy. Filled with confidence, he marshaled his armies, crossed the Halys River, and engaged the Persians in battle. He was utterly, catastrophically defeated. His armies were shattered, his kingdom was conquered, and he himself was captured and sentenced to be burned alive on a pyre. As the flames licked at his feet, he screamed out the name of the Athenian sage, Solon, who had once warned him that no man could be called happy until he was dead. The Persian king, Cyrus the Great, heard his cry and asked him to explain. Croesus told him the whole story of the oracle's prophecy. Intrigued, Cyrus sent messengers back to Delphi to demand an explanation from the god. How could a god of truth have deceived him so? Apollo's response, delivered once more through the Pythia, was chilling in its logical perfection. The god, he explained, had spoken the absolute truth. By crossing the river and going to war, Croesus had destroyed a great empire. His own. The oracle had been correct. It was Croesus's own hubris, his own arrogant interpretation, that had been his downfall. The god had provided the truth. He could not be blamed for the mortal's lack of wisdom in understanding it. This story became a timeless lesson, a warning that Apollo's truth was a razor's edge. It offered no comfort, no guarantees, only a glimpse into the machinery of fate, a machine that was just as likely to crush the questioner as it was to guide him. This dangerous, detached nature of his prophetic power is the backdrop for his personal romantic tragedies. And nowhere is this agony of truth more painfully illustrated than in his encounter with Cassandra, the tragic princess of Troy. Cassandra was the daughter of King Priam and Queen Hecuba, and her beauty was so otherworldly that it ensnared the god of light himself. Apollo became utterly infatuated with her. As is the way of the gods, he sought to purchase her affections with a divine gift. And what greater gift could the god of prophecy offer than his own power? He promised Cassandra the divine gift of true foresight. In exchange, she would become his lover. Cassandra, a mortal princess faced with the attentions of a radiant god, accepted. The bargain was struck. Apollo, to seal the deal and impart the power, leaned in to give her a divine kiss. As he did, he breathed the sacred fire of prophecy into her mouth, into her very soul. In an instant the veil was lifted. The tangled threads of past, present, and future became clear to her. She could see what was to come. She possessed the god's own sight. But in that same moment of gaining divine knowledge, she had a profound change of heart. Perhaps with her newfound sight, she foresaw the suffocating possessive nature of a god's love. Perhaps she saw that to be Apollo's consort was to be his property for eternity. Or perhaps she simply valued her own mortal autonomy more than she valued a divine lover. Whatever the reason, she recoiled. She spat him out, refusing to honor her side of the bargain. Apollo was stunned, then consumed by a furious, wounded pride. He had been tricked. He, the god of truth, had been deceived by a mortal girl. His magnificent gift, the most precious power he possessed, had been accepted, and the price her love had been arrogantly withheld. He could not revoke the gift of prophecy. The word of a god once given is absolute and cannot be taken back. But he could amend it. He could corrupt it. He could twist his perfect gift into a perfect instrument of psychological torture. And so, with the second divine breath or another venomous kiss, he laid upon her his curse. It was a curse of exquisite, malevolent genius. He did not take away her sight. He did not strike her blind. Instead, he decreed that while she would always, with perfect clarity, see the truth of what was to come, no one, not her beloved father, not her trusted brothers, not her desperate countrymen, no one would ever believe her. Think on the sheer diabolical horror of this fate. Apollo did not condemn her to ignorance. He condemned her to be the sole occupant of a world of agonizing truth, while everyone around her remained blissfully, stubbornly blind. He made her a prophet whose truth was utterly useless. Her life became a waking nightmare. She saw the truth of the Trojan War. When her brother Paris brought Helen to Troy, Cassandra screamed of the fleets that would come, of the city that would burn, but her family saw only a hysterical woman ruining a celebration. When the Greeks built their great wooden horse and left it on the beach, she beat upon its hollow belly, hearing the clank of armor within, and shrieked warnings of the doom it contained. The Trojans, laughing, called her mad and dragged their own destruction through the city gates. She foresaw the murder of the great King Agamemnon upon his victorious return, tangled in a net in his own bathtub, and she was ignored. She foresaw her own death at the hands of Agamemnon's vengeful wife, and she walked toward it, powerless to convince anyone to save her. Her life became a constant, frantic scream into a soundproof wall. Apollo, the god of light, had created the ultimate tragedy of truth. Knowledge without influence, sight without power. A mind forever haunted by visions of disasters she was powerless to avert. Cassandra's fate is a dark and twisted mirror of Apollo's own. He too was haunted by what he knew, his clarity providing no comfort, his foresight no protection against heartbreak. In punishing her for her rejection, he had merely crafted a mortal reflection of his own divine, prophetic agony. A variation of this tragic theme, of a divine gift becoming a curse, plays out in his encounter with the Sibyl of Cumae, a mortal priestess of his named Amalthea. Once again, Apollo was smitten by the beauty and piety of his priestess. And once again, he sought to purchase her love with a grand divine gesture. "Ask for anything your heart desires," the golden god declared, his voice filled with the promise of eternity, "and it shall be yours." The Cumaean Sibyl was cleverer and warier than Cassandra. She understood the double-edged nature of divine gifts. She did not ask for an abstract power like prophecy. She asked for the one thing mortals crave above all else: time. She stooped to the ground, scooped up a handful of dust and sand, and held it out to the god. "I ask," she said, "for a year of life for every grain of dust in my hand." Apollo, delighted by her cleverness and eager to win her, readily granted her wish without a second thought. He gave her a lifespan of 1,000 years. But when he moved to claim his prize, to take her as his lover, she, like Cassandra, rejected him. She had secured the gift, and now she refused the giver. Apollo was scorned again. But his revenge this time was not one of swift, angry magic. It was a cold, patient, and arguably even more cruel revenge, one based on the literal interpretation of a contract. He had granted her wish for 1,000 years of life exactly as she had asked for it. But in her cleverness, she had made a fatal oversight. She had forgotten to ask for the one crucial thing that must accompany it: eternal youth. And so the Sibyl lived, and lived, and lived for century after agonizing century. But with every passing year, her body continued to wither. She aged. Her skin, once beautiful, turned to a fine wrinkled parchment. Her limbs grew frail, her back bent. She grew smaller and smaller, shrinking with every decade, her voice fading from the powerful chants of a priestess to the dry, rasping whisper of ancient dust. Eventually, she became so ancient and so shrunken that her followers, out of a mix of reverence and pity, placed her in a glass jar, an ampulla, and hung it from the ceiling of her sacred cave. She became a tourist attraction, a living relic of a god's spite. The Roman poet Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, tells us that children would come to the cave and call up to the jar, "Sibyl, what do you want?" And from within the glass her tiny ethereal voice would whisper back the same heartbreaking reply, "Apothenian Thello, I want to die." Her gift of life had become her prison of death in life. The prophecy she had requested had become a curse of eternal decay. In both these terrible stories, we see the unveiling of a dark and consistent pattern. Apollo's attempts at love are not born of connection, they are transactional. He uses his divine power as a bargaining chip, a tool for acquisition. And when the bargain is refused, when his divine pride is wounded, his love instantly curdles into a vengeful, disproportionate rage. He, the god of reason and light, the god of clarity and truth, is revealed to be petty, proud, and monstrously vindictive when his own desires are thwarted. His greatest gift, the truth of what is to come, becomes, in his own hands, a tool for inflicting eternal torment, a curse that he casts upon others, never realizing that he is merely projecting the agony of his own haunted heart. The curse of the prophet is to know a tragic truth but be powerless to change it. We have witnessed this agony in Apollo's dealings with Cassandra and the Sibyl, where his gift of foresight became a tool of eternal torment. In those tales, the god of truth failed to win love through the very power he commanded. But there is another, perhaps even darker and more intimate, layer to his tragedy. There were times when love was within his grasp, when his affection was returned, or when the object of his desire was near. And it was in these moments that a different, more personal curse manifested. In these stories, it is not his prophetic gift that fails him, but his very nature as a god. His divine intensity, his radiant heat, his unrestrained passions, the very qualities that define him as the sun god, become a destructive, fatal force. He is the sun, but those he seeks to warm are too often burned by his proximity. He is the god of light, but his brilliance casts a long and deadly shadow. And within that shadow we find the heartbreaking, recurring motif of his love leading, with the grim certainty of one of his own prophecies, to death, transformation, and eternal mourning. The most famous and defining of these tragedies is the story of the nymph Daphne. And it begins, as so many of Apollo's tragedies do, not with love, but with his own divine pride. Fresh from his monumental victory over the Python at Delphi, the golden god was brimming with an arrogant self-satisfaction. He felt himself to be the ultimate archer, the ultimate victor. In this state of hubris, he came upon the younger god of love, Eros, known to the Romans as Cupid, who was toying with his own small, elegant bow and arrows. Apollo, in a moment of patronizing arrogance, looked down upon the winged god and mocked him. "What business does a boy like you have with a warrior's weapons?" he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Leave such powerful things to me. My arrows have the strength to slay a mighty serpent. Yours are for trivial games, for stirring up the fleeting passions of mortals and foolish gods." Eros, the embodiment of a power far more ancient, chaotic, and fundamental than Apollo's cold reason, was infuriated. To have his domain, the force that could bring empires to their knees and drive gods to madness, dismissed as a trivial game, was an insult he could not bear. He resolved then and there to teach the god of light a lesson he would never forget about the true power of his arrows. He flew to a high peak of Mount Parnassus and drew 2 specialized darts from his quiver. They were his instruments of emotional warfare. One was tipped with sharp, gleaming gold, meticulously crafted to incite an uncontrollable, obsessive, all-consuming love in whomever it struck. The other was its horrifying opposite. It was blunt, crude, and tipped with lead, designed to cause an equally powerful feeling of revulsion and to inspire a desperate, panicked flight from any suitor. With a malicious grin, Eros took aim. He shot the golden arrow of obsessive love first, and it flew with unerring accuracy, embedding itself deep in Apollo's heart. He then sought out his second target. He found her in the woods, the beautiful nymph Daphne. She was a fierce, independent spirit, a daughter of the river god Peneus and a devoted follower of Apollo's own twin sister, Artemis. Like Artemis, Daphne cherished her freedom and had sworn an oath of perpetual virginity, shunning the advances of all men and gods. Into her unsuspecting heart, Eros fired the blunt, leaden arrow of repulsion. The effect was instantaneous, and it was a cosmic catastrophe. Apollo, the god of reason, the master of clarity and self-control, was seized with a love so sudden, so violent, so all-consuming that it completely overwhelmed his divine intellect. He saw Daphne, and in that single moment, she became the sole focus of his entire existence. All reason fled. All other duties were forgotten. He was now a slave to a chemically induced obsession, a puppet whose strings were pulled by Eros's golden dart. He approached her, his heart ablaze. But for Daphne, the effect was precisely the opposite. The moment she saw him, her heart filled with an inexplicable dread and revulsion. The golden god's radiant beauty seemed menacing. His words of love, which would have made any other mortal or nymph swoon, sounded to her like the threats of a predator. His loving gaze felt like a violation. She felt only one overwhelming impulse: to flee. And so began the great chase, a scene immortalized by poets and sculptors for all time. Apollo, his divine speed fueled by a desperate, maddening love, pursued her through the forest. Daphne, her mortal limbs powered by pure, unreasoning terror, fled for her life. It was a race between divine obsession and mortal revulsion. "Do not run from me," Apollo cried out, his voice a pleading echo through the trees. "I am not a common shepherd. I am the Lord of Delphi. It is love that makes me follow you." But his words were meaningless to her. His divinity was the very source of her terror. He was gaining on her. The chase was long and desperate, her lungs burning, her legs aching. He was the sun chasing a comet across the sky, and he was inexorably closing the distance. He could feel the warmth of her breath on the back of his neck. His outstretched hands were just about to grasp her shoulder. Daphne, exhausted, on the very verge of capture, saw before her the banks of her father's river. In a final desperate act, she screamed out a prayer, not for speed, not for rescue, but for oblivion. "Father, help me!" she cried, her voice breaking with sobs. "If your rivers have divine power, then change me. Destroy this beauty, this form that has brought me this unwanted suffering." Her father, the river god, heard her desperate plea. Just as Apollo's hand finally brushed against her skin, a strange heavy numbness seized her limbs. A thick, rough bark began to encase her soft skin, her body becoming rigid. Her soft hair, flowing behind her in the wind, sprouted and thickened into leaves. Her arms, reaching for salvation, grew long and stiff, becoming branches. Her feet, so swift in their frantic flight, became tangled and rooted deep into the damp earth. She was transforming before his very eyes. When Apollo finally closed his grasp, he was not holding the warm, soft shoulder of a nymph. He was embracing the rough trunk of a laurel tree. He stood there, stunned, his obsessive passion thwarted at the very moment of its fulfillment. His chase was over, and he had lost. He had been defeated by a power greater than his own, the power of a being to choose a mindless, vegetative existence over his divine embrace. His love was so terrifying that she had opted for oblivion. His passion finally cooled, replaced by a wave of profound and eternal grief. He held the tree, pressing his lips to the bark, but the wood still seemed to shrink from his touch. "Since you cannot be my bride," he wept, his tears watering the new roots, "you shall at least be my sacred tree. My lyre and my quiver will be made of your wood. Your leaves, the laurel, will crown the heads of heroes. They will adorn the brows of poets. They will be the symbol of victory for all time." And so it was. The laurel wreath, the most coveted symbol of victory, glory, and artistic achievement in the entire Western world, is, in its very origin, a monument to Apollo's greatest romantic failure. It is a crown of mourning, a perpetual tragic reminder that his divine light was so intense, so consuming, that the object of his affection chose to sacrifice her very being rather than endure it. Every victor crowned with laurel wears a symbol of his heartbreak. This haunting theme of love leading to death takes an even more direct and violent turn in the story of Caronis, a mortal princess from Thessaly. In this tale, Apollo's love was at first returned. Caronis loved the golden god, and he her. For a time they were happy, and she became pregnant with his child. But the life of a god is long, and their duties are many. Apollo was often away, presiding over his duties at his great temple in Delphi. During one of his long absences, Caronis, perhaps out of loneliness, perhaps out of mortal frailty and foolishness, was unfaithful. She took a mortal lover, a man from Arcadia named Ischys. The betrayal did not go unseen. Apollo had left his sacred bird, in some versions a crow, in others a raven, but always pure Witeto watch over his beloved Caronis. The bird saw the act of infidelity and, in its loyalty to its master, immediately flew to Delphi to report the news. Apollo, the god of truth, was now confronted with a terrible truth he did not want to hear. And in that moment, his divine nature fractured. His famed reason, his light of clarity, was utterly extinguished, consumed by a wave of white-hot, jealous rage. It was a fury that would have made his father, Zeus, or his brutish brother, Ares, proud. He did not seek confirmation. He did not weigh the evidence. He acted. Blinded by his rage, he strung his terrible silver bow. He drew a single deadly arrow, and with all his divine strength, he shot his lover, the mother of his unborn child. The arrow, an instrument of a god's fury, flew true. It pierced her heart. As Caronis lay dying, the fire of Apollo's rage finally subsided, replaced instantly by a crushing, soul-destroying wave of regret. He rushed to her side, the god of healing desperately trying to use all his medicinal arts to save the woman he had just murdered. But it was too late. An arrow from a god cannot be undone by that same god's pity. Her last words to him were a heartbreaking accusation. "You could have punished me alone," she gasped, the life fading from her eyes. "But you were angry, and now too must die." The truth of her words struck him. He had not only killed her, but his own son. As her body was placed on the funeral pyre and the flames began to rise, Apollo, in a final act of desperate love and profound grief, performed a miraculous and gruesome act. He, the god who presides over the sacred rites of purification, reached into the flames of the pyre and, like a divine surgeon, cut his unborn infant son from his mother's corpse. That child was Asclepius. Apollo, perhaps unable to bear the sight of the child who was a constant reminder of his own monstrous act, gave the infant to the wise centaur Chiron to be raised. Asclepius would grow up to become the greatest healer the world had ever known. The true father of medicine, a healer so skilled he would eventually challenge death itself. But his very existence was a monument to his father's catastrophic failure. The greatest god of healing in the Greek pantheon was born from an act of murder, committed by the god of healing himself. And what of the messenger, the loyal white bird who had brought the unwelcome truth? In his grief and misplaced anger, Apollo turned on the creature. He cursed the faithful bird for being a tattletale, for being the bearer of such painful news. And for its loyalty he scorched its pure white feathers black for all eternity. This, the myths say, is why all crows and ravens are black. In this single horrifying tragedy, Apollo reveals the full spectrum of his contradictions. He is a passionate lover, a jealous murderer, a miraculous healer, and a cruel, unjust tyrant who punishes the very bearer of the truth he is supposed to champion. But perhaps the most profound and direct of all these love-born tragedies, the one that speaks most clearly to the theme of Apollo being haunted by a fate he cannot control, is the story of the Spartan prince Hyacinthus. In this relationship there was no hubris, no chase, no betrayal. The love between Apollo and the beautiful youth Hyacinthus was deep, pure, and requited. They were inseparable companions. They would hunt together in the rugged hills of Laconia. They would compose and play music together. And they would delight in competing in athletic games. This was not a story of obsession or possession. It was a tale of simple, joyous companionship. One bright, sun-drenched afternoon on the fields outside of Sparta, Apollo and Hyacinthus decided to practice throwing the discus. They took turns, stripped for exercise, laughing as they tested their strength and skill against one another. It came to be Apollo's turn. Wanting to impress his beloved with his divine power, he coiled his perfect, immortal body and unleashed a mighty throw. The heavy bronze discus flew through the air like a shining meteor, soaring higher and farther than any mortal could ever hope to throw it. Hyacinthus, full of youthful eagerness and wanting to show his own skill, ran after it, hoping to catch the discus as it fell and hurl it back. But as the bronze disc began its descent, a sudden freak gust of wind caught it. Some later poets, trying to find reason in the tragedy, would claim this wind was sent by a jealous rival for Hyacinthus's affection, the west wind. Zephyrusho was enraged at being spurned for Apollo. But in the original telling, it is simply a tragedy of chance. A random gust. The wind blew the heavy discus off its course. Hyacinthus, looking up, had no time to react. The disc struck him squarely in the temple with terrible force. The boy collapsed without a sound, a fatal wound gushing crimson blood onto the green grass. Apollo screamed in horror and rushed to his side. The god of healing, the master of all medicine, the one who could cleanse entire cities of plague, frantically tried to stop the bleeding. He used all his divine knowledge, applied sacred herbs, whispered incantations. But it was useless. The injury was too severe. The fates had spun this thread, and their decree was absolute. Not even the god of prophecy could cut or reweave it. Apollo's grief was total. He held the dying boy in his arms, his divine tears mingling with the mortal blood, his heart shattered by the cruel randomness of the universe. He was the god who could see the future of kingdoms, who could warn heroes of their doom, yet he was utterly powerless to prevent this one simple tragic accident. His prophetic sight was a curse, offering him no protection for what mattered most in his own life. From the blood-soaked earth where Hyacinthus died, a new flower sprang forth, a flower more beautiful than any seen before. It was the hyacinth, and upon its deep purple petals Apollo, in his eternal grief, used his own tears to inscribe the letters Ai, the ancient Greek cry of profound mourning. Unlike the laurel, which became a symbol of victory born from Apollo's defeat, the hyacinth is a symbol of pure, unadulterated grief. It is the ultimate testament to Apollo's tragedy. It proves that even when his love was pure, even when his intentions were good, even when there was no hubris or betrayal, the chaotic, unpredictable nature of fate could strike him down. He was the god of light and order, but he lived in a universe where jealous winds and random chance held ultimate power over his own happiness. He could see the future, but he was forever a prisoner of the present moment, haunted by the knowledge that all his radiant light could not hold back the inevitable, and often accidental, darkness. The tragedies of Apollo's personal life reveal a god haunted by the failures of his own divine attributes. His light, intended to warm, instead burned those he loved. His prophetic sight, meant to bring clarity, only served to illuminate the grim, unchangeable path of his own heartbreak. But to fully grasp the darkness that coexisted with his brilliance, we must now turn from the intimate realm of his personal relationships to the public square of his divine authority. For Apollo was not merely a lover and a prophet. He was a standard-bearer, a cultural arbiter, and when challenged, a ruthless enforcer of his own radiant ideals. He was the god of harmony, the patron of music, the symbol of reason, the divine champion of civilization itself. But his was the tyranny of perfection. He did not merely suggest a standard. He demanded absolute adherence to it. And those who fell short of his perfect model, or worse, those who in a fit of fatal pride dared to challenge it, were met with a punishment that was absolute, spectacular, and horrifyingly cruel. In these stories we see that the god of light could also be a god of merciless, terrifying judgment, and that the god of healing could, with the same hands, become a divine executioner. Nowhere is this tyrannical aspect of his nature more vividly and brutally displayed than in his musical contest with the satyr Marsyas. Marsyas was not a god. He was a creature of the wild woods of Phrygia, a satyr, a being connected to the earthy, passionate, and ecstatic traditions of the great mother goddess Cybele and the wine god Dionysus. One day, while walking by a river, Marsyas discovered a unique musical instrument lying in the reeds. It was an aulos, a type of double flute, and it had a divine origin. It had been invented by the goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom herself, but she had quickly discarded it, throwing it away in disgust after she saw her reflection in a pool of water, and realized how puffing out her cheeks to play it distorted her perfectly beautiful face. Marsyas, a being untroubled by such vanity, picked up the discarded instrument. He was not a trained musician in the Apollonian sense. He could not read notes or understand complex theories of harmony, but he possessed a raw, natural talent. He put the flute to his lips and drew from it music that was wild, deeply emotional, and powerfully moving. His music was not the ordered, intellectual harmony of the heavens. It was the untamed music of the mortal heart, of the wilderness, of ecstatic revels and deep, instinctual sorrows. His skill on this flute grew so great that his fame spread throughout the land. And with that fame grew a fatal pride. In a moment of supreme hubris, Marsyas began to boast that the music he made was more beautiful, more moving, than that of Apollo himself, the god of the lyre. He issued a direct challenge to the god. proposing a musical contest to settle the matter once and for all. Apollo, the very embodiment of divine, ordered and mathematical harmony, accepted the challenge. Such a claim from a lesser being could not be allowed to stand. The contest was arranged, and the judges were to be the 9 Muses, Apollo's own divine companions and the spirits of the arts. Marsyas, the challenger, played first. He took up his flute, the instrument rejected by Olympian perfection, and poured his very soul into it. He played the music of the earth off the rushing streams, the whispering winds, the wild dances of the Maenads. His melody was filled with passion, with pain, with untamed joy. The audience, including the local king, Midas, was utterly enthralled, captivated by the raw emotional power of his art. Then it was Apollo's turn. He stood, a figure of radiant, calm perfection, and took up his golden lyre, the instrument of civilization, of reason, of celestial harmony. The music he produced was breathtaking in its technical and intellectual brilliance. Every note was perfect, every chord was pure. It was a sound that spoke of the mathematical harmony of the planets, the logical structure of the cosmos, the serene and untouchable order of the divine. It was the music of the mind, in stark contrast to Marsyas' music of the heart. The contest was closer than Apollo had anticipated. The Muses were torn. They were moved by the passionate, earthly music of the satyr, yet awed by the divine intellectual perfection of the god. The outcome was uncertain. King Midas, in fact, declared that he preferred the playing of Marsyas. Seeing that he might not win on pure artistic merit alone, Apollo, the god who was supposed to represent order and fair play, decided to change the rules. He declared that the contest should be a test of total musical skill, and to that end, he challenged Marsyas to play his instrument upside down and sing at the same time. This, of course, was a feat that was simple for Apollo with his stringed lyre, which he could play in any position while singing his paeans. But for Marsyas and his wind instrument, the aulos, it was physically impossible. He could not blow into it and sing at the same time. Marsyas naturally could not meet the new challenge. Apollo effortlessly played his lyre inverted, his beautiful voice filling the air. Bound by the new terms of the contest, the Muses had no choice but to declare Apollo the victor. But for Apollo, mere victory was not enough. The satyr's challenge was a profound act of hubris. A mortal, or at least a semi-mortal creature of the earth, had dared to place his chaotic, emotional art on the same level as the perfect, rational art of a god. Such an insult to the divine order, to Apollo's very essence, could not go unpunished. And the punishment Apollo devised was not a simple, swift smiting. It was an act of slow, methodical, and pedagogic cruelty. It was a terrifying lesson in the absolute and unbridgeable chasm that separates gods from lesser beings. He seized the terrified Marsyas. He dragged him to a tall pine tree and, with the help of his servants, strung him up by his arms. Then Apollo, the god of healing, the deity who knew the precise anatomy of the body, every nerve, every muscle, every sinew, took out a sharp knife. And he began to flay Marsyas alive. He peeled the skin from the satyr's living, screaming body in a single continuous sheet. The wild musician who had dared to challenge perfection was systematically and consciously deconstructed. His living form turned into a single bleeding mass of raw, quivering muscle. It was the ultimate act of unmaking. His crime was a belief in the value of his own art, and his punishment was to be turned into an object of pure, unmitigated horror. The myths say that the rivers of the land of Phrygia were formed by the weeping tears of the nymphs, fauns, and other woodland creatures who mourned his terrible fate. This story is a horrifying allegory, one that philosophers have debated for centuries. It is the eternal conflict between the two sides of the human spirit: the Apollonian, representing order, reason, restraint, and civilized harmony, and the Dionysian, of which Marsyas is a clear agent, representing chaos, emotion, ecstasy, and natural instinct. But in this foundational myth, The Apollonian does not win through a superior argument or a more beautiful vision. It wins through brutal, tyrannical violence. Apollo's harmony is revealed to be a rigid, totalitarian order that cannot tolerate a rival voice. His light of civilization is imposed by skinning alive that which is different, that which is wild, that which is passionate. The god of art becomes a divine torturer. His hands, which could bring healing, instead bringing an agony beyond all imagination. This same capacity for disproportionate, familial punishment is on full display in the tragedy of Niobe, the queen of Thebes. Niobe was a mortal woman, but one blessed by the gods in almost every way. She was a queen married to King Amphion, wealthy, powerful, and respected. But her greatest source of pride, the blessing that would lead to her doom, was her children. She had been blessed with 14 beautiful, perfect children, 7 strong, athletic sons and 7 lovely, graceful daughters. One day, the people of Thebes were holding a festival in honor of the goddess Leto, the mother of Apollo and Artemis. They offered her incense and prayers. Niobe, observing these rites, was filled with the fatal, consuming arrogance. She stepped before her people, her head held high, and interrupted the sacred ceremony. "Why do you worship Leto?" she demanded, her voice ringing with hubris. "What has she done to deserve this? She has borne only 2 children. Look at me. I have borne 14. I am 7 times the mother she is. My blessings are clearly far greater than hers. My happiness is secure. It is I who should have a temple, not her." This was an act of supreme and direct blasphemy. She had not only mocked a goddess, but she had belittled the very mother of 2 of the most powerful and dangerous deities on Olympus. News of this public insult traveled swiftly, reaching Leto on her sacred island of Delos. The Titaness was enraged. She summoned her 2 children, the divine twins, her face dark with fury. She recounted Niobe's arrogant words and demanded that they, her children, defend her divine honor. Apollo and Artemis, ever loyal to the mother who had suffered so much to bring them into the world, did not hesitate. They were not just children defending their mother. They were the immune system of the divine order, tasked with eradicating the infection of mortal hubris. They descended from the heavens cloaked in clouds, their silver and golden bows in their hands, ready to act as divine assassins. Apollo went first. He found Niobe's 7 sons on the athletic fields outside the city, practicing their sports, riding horses, wrestling, throwing the javelin, blissfully unaware of the doom their mother's words had brought upon them. From his invisible vantage point in the clouds, Apollo, the god of the unerring arrow, took aim. One by one, he shot them down with his merciless silver bow. An arrow pierced one son's neck as he expertly rode his horse. Another was struck through the heart as he wrestled with his brother. Another, begging the gods for mercy, was silenced by an arrow before his prayer was finished. They fell, one after another, a systematic, cold, and efficient slaughter, until all 7 lay dead in the dust of their playing fields. A messenger, gasping in terror, brought the news to the palace. Niobe, her husband Amphion, who in some versions killed himself in grief, and her 7 terrified daughters rushed out to the fields. The sight of her 7 dead sons filled Niobe with a grief beyond words. But even in this unimaginable sorrow, her pride was not yet broken. She stood over the bodies of her sons and looking defiantly up at the heavens she cried out, "You have taken half, cruel Leto. You have made me miserable. But even now, in my misery, I still have more children than you. I am still the victor." Her final, defiant boast sealed the fate of her remaining children. As the 7 daughters gathered around their mother, weeping for their fallen brothers, they too were marked for death. This time it was Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt, the supposed protector of young girls, who drew her bow. And just as her brother had done, she began to kill. One by one the daughters fell, pierced by the silent, deadly arrows of the goddess. A girl weaving, a girl running to her mother's side, all struck down. The last and youngest daughter clung to Niobe's robes. And Niobe, her pride finally and completely shattered, shielded the small girl with her own body and begged the heavens, her voice finally broken. "Leave me this one," she pleaded. "Leave me just the youngest." But her prayer came too late. The final arrow flew, striking the last child, who died in her mother's arms. Niobe, now childless, her mind and heart completely broken by a grief too vast for a mortal soul to comprehend, simply knelt there motionless. The gods, perhaps in a final act of cruel pity, turned her to stone. She became a statue, forever frozen in her grief. A whirlwind then transported her back to a mountain in her Anatolian homeland of Lydia, where, the ancients said, she remains to this day a weeping rock face, from which a stream of her eternal tears flows. In this horrifying story, Apollo is once again revealed as a figure of terrifying contradiction. He is the god Keratrophos, the protector of youth, yet he willingly participates in the methodical slaughter of 14 innocent young people to avenge a verbal insult. He is the god of healing, the one whose very name means to ward off evil. Yet his divine arrows are the very instruments of plague and sudden, inexplicable death. His actions are not those of a god of reason or light. They are the actions of a divine enforcer, a celestial hitman carrying out a contract to protect his family's honor. Through the agonizing screams of Marsyas and the silent stone tears of Niobe, the darker side of Apollo's nature is laid bare. His light is not a gentle, warming glow. It is a harsh, interrogating spotlight that demands perfection and punishes any deviation with extreme prejudice. His harmony is not an invitation to a joyous dance. It is a command to march in lockstep, or be brutally silenced. His vaunted civilization is a fragile construct, defended with a cold, calculated savagery that rivals that of his brutish, blood-soaked brother, Ares. The god of light, it turns out, is the undisputed master of a very dark and terrifying shadow. We have journeyed through the radiant triumphs and the dark tragedies that define the god of light. We have stood with him at the founding of his great oracle at Delphi, a place that promised clarity to a world shrouded in doubt. We have witnessed his bitter and often cruel failures in the realm of love, where his affections brought torment and death. We have grieved with him over the body of his beloved Hyacinthus, a victim of random, pitiless fate. And we have recoiled from the brutal, tyrannical punishments he inflicted upon those who dared to challenge his divine, perfect order. Now, at the end of our chronicle, we must unravel the final central paradox of his being. We must gather the scattered, contradictory threads of his story and see what tapestry they weave. What does it mean to be a god of light who casts such a long and terrible shadow? What does it mean to be a god of clarity, who lives a life of such profound and painful contradiction? The image of Apollo that emerges from the mists of mythology is not one of simple, sun-kissed perfection. It is the complex and haunting portrait of a being at war with himself. He is a god whose greatest gifts were simultaneously the source of his most profound suffering. He is the divine embodiment of the curse of knowledge, the agony of foresight, and the eternal, deeply human struggle between our highest, most rational ideals and our most painful, inescapable realities. He was not just haunted by his prophecies. He was a prisoner of his own magnificent, brilliant, and deeply tragic nature. To fully understand this, let us revisit the great domains over which he ruled, and see how each one, in turn, became a source of his own personal torment. First, and most famously, he was the god of prophecy, the voice of divine truth. From his golden tripod at Delphi, his words could launch fleets, found cities, and dictate the fate of nations. He held the future of the world in his hands. Yet, what did this unparalleled foresight bring to him personally? Did it bring him happiness, peace, control over his own destiny? The myths answer with a resounding, tragic no. His prophetic power brought him the agony of Cassandra, a prophetess of his own creation, cursed by him to see the truth of Troy's destruction but never be believed. He gave her sight, but paired it with impotence, mirroring his own divine condition. He could see the future, but as his own love life demonstrated, he was often powerless to change it. His gift of sight brought him the foreknowledge that his pure love for the boy Hyacinthus would end in a bloody, accidental death, a tragedy he could foresee but was utterly powerless to prevent. His ability to know the future did not grant him the power to alter it where it mattered most in the affairs of his own heart. It only forced him to be a spectator to his own tragedies, to watch them unfold in slow, excruciating, inexorable motion. For Apollo, the gift of prophecy was not a gift of power, but a sentence of helpless, eternal spectatorship. Second, he was the god of reason and light, the divine force of the Apollonian ideal, a concept so powerful that philosophers would later name an entire mode of human consciousness after him. He represented the triumph of order over chaos, of the clear-headed intellect over raw, untamed emotion. Yet, his own life story is a recurring testament to the spectacular failure of reason in the face of passion. His pursuit of the nymph Daphne was not rational. It was a maddening, terrifying, obsessive frenzy induced by the irrational arrow of Eros. His cold-blooded murder of his lover Carinus was not an act of calculated justice. It was an explosion of jealous, possessive rage worthy of his brutish brother Ares. In the aftermath of that tragedy, he punishes the innocent crow for being the bearer of an unwelcome truth, an act that is the very antithesis of reason. In his most critical personal moments, the god of reason was repeatedly and catastrophically undone by his own untamable, all-too-human passions. He was the champion of an ideal he himself could not live up to. Third, he was the god of harmony and art, the patron of the civilized lyre, the master of celestial music and poetry. The harmony he represented was one of mathematical precision, of divine ordered beauty. But as we saw in the horrifying fate of Marsyas, this harmony was not a gentle, inclusive chorus that invited all voices. It was a rigid, tyrannical standard that demanded absolute conformity. The satyr Marsyas, a creature of the earth, offered a different kind of music, a music of wild, untamed emotion, of the passionate heart. And for this, for the hubris of believing his art had value, he was not just defeated in a rigged contest. He was flayed alive. Apollo's harmony in this context is revealed as a totalitarian system that cannot tolerate a rival aesthetic. His art is not a celebration of beauty in all its forms, but a weapon used to enforce his own narrow dogmatic definition of it. The sublime, beautiful music of his golden lyre is forever accompanied, in the background, by the agonizing screams of the flayed satyr. Fourth, he was the god of healing, the father of medicine, Alexikakos, the warder off of evil. With his shining arrows he could cleanse a city of plague. His knowledge of herbs and the body was supreme. Yet, it was these very same arrows that he used to deliver pestilence and sudden, inexplicable death to the 14 innocent children of the proud queen Niobe. His role as a divine healer is thrown into horrific relief by his equal capacity to act as a divine executioner. This contradiction is embodied in the very birth of his greatest son, Asclepius. The greatest healer in Greek myth, the man who would become the god of medicine, was born through a miraculous act of his father's healing power and emergency caesarean section. But this act was only necessary because his father, the god of healing, had murdered his mother moments before. Apollo is both the cure and the disease, the giver of life and the bringer of death, often in the same tragic narrative. His hands, which could perform the miracle of saving a child from a funeral pyre, were the same hands that had lit the fire. This, then, is the ultimate unraveling of the myth of Apollo. He is not a god of simple, benevolent light. He is the god of the unbearable brightness that doesn't just illuminate, but blinds. His clarity does not bring peace. It reveals the stark, unchangeable, and often horrifying architecture of fate. His reason cannot build a dam strong enough to hold back the tidal wave of passion. His harmony demands a terrifying silence from all dissenting voices. His power to heal is inextricably bound to his power to kill. Apollo in the end represents one of the most sophisticated, enduring, and tragic concepts in all of mythology. He is the perfect embodiment of the human condition at its most elevated and simultaneously, at its most painful. He is the brilliant scientist who can map the cosmos but cannot mend his own broken heart. He is the sublime artist who creates works of breathtaking beauty, but is a cruel and intolerant critic of all other forms of expression. He is the wise leader who can see the dangers that lie on the path ahead, but is trapped on that very path, unable to deviate from it by a single step. He is haunted because he knows too much. He sees the inevitable outcome: the laurel tree, the bleeding youth, the weeping stone, but is fated to walk the path toward it anyway, his divine heart breaking at every step. His story is a profound and timeless meditation on the nature of fate and free will, on the relationship between order and chaos, and on the often unbearable burden of a consciousness that can comprehend its own suffering, but is powerless to prevent it. The brilliant light of Apollo does not, and cannot, exist without the profound darkness of the shadows it casts. And it was in those shadows, the shadows created by his own dazzling light, that the god of prophecy was destined to live out his own, personal and inescapable tragedy. And so, whether we speak of the fury of the battlefield or the clarity of the sun, we find a story not of simple power, but of profound and inescapable consequence. The great gods of Olympus were not merely masters of their domains. They were living vessels for the great paradoxes of existence. Their myths are not just tales of divine might, but deep, enduring explorations of the very nature of conflict, desire, truth, and sorrow. They remind us that to be a god of a powerful concept is to also be eternally bound to its burdens. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of the Greek pantheon. The stories passed down through the millennia are rich with these hidden meanings, waiting for those who are willing to look beyond the surface. If you wish to continue your exploration of the ancient and the arcane, and to challenge the accepted narratives of mythology, be sure to subscribe to the Eldritch Codex and activate the notification bell. There are many more chronicles awaiting in the archives. Let us know in the comments. Which god's story do you find to be the most tragic and why? Your insights and discussions are a vital part of this community. Until next time, remember that even in the brightest light and the darkest battle, there are deeper truths waiting to be found.